Okay, hello everyone. As you know, I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, and I'm joined by two amazing guests today, Harald Kautz Vella, who's very famous doing incredible research, and many of you know him, and especially Joachim Gerlach. Joachim is one of the founders of Vedicinals.com, and they have heroically put together a natural Vedic solution, holistic, he will tell you about it, which is dramatic, to issues like long COVID and other things, which is, I really recommend you check out Vedicinals.com. Incidentally, we think the synergy with our Therify.net plasma has been shown to be amazing. But I'm here at their service for this conversation. Joachim and Harald, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Dan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this nice introduction. And I really appreciate that you take your time, because we have been in contact for so many years, and our let's say our fields of interest are overlapping, and you carry things, you and Harald, to a way different level than our approach, which is simply more on the molecular biological level. And you guys look much deeper upstream into the processes of life itself and fractality, and what DNA can do, and what about all this negentropy and all these processes of keeping organisms coherent and alive, and actually really looking at what it means, where life comes from, what is life in that sense. So it's pretty interesting to look at that angle, as we are surrounded by so much disease and death. So why not have a good look at what life is and what can support life? So maybe have Harald also say some introductory words. Harald?
Yeah, well, what I think is very useful, we have in the medical community different layers of approaches. What you perfectly cover is the biochemical aspect, which is adding substances that are needed by the body. Then there is another layer of medical applications that is what I would call information medicine. This is including homeopathy, radionics, or the quantum medical applications coming in from Russia that simply do a good job in diagnosis and sometimes even in treatment. And actually we have found an additional layer on top of that, because with informational medicine you can apply patterns that already exist. And we have found, looking for solutions for the COVID complex, we have found something that I would rather call inspirational medicine, where you have like input on field levels, bringing in patterns that don't pre-exist in our realm. This comes from the field of global scaling, which is another level of fractal science that makes things possible that
yes,
are not often talked about.
Hartmut Mueller is a global scaling related to phase conjugation and even energy at a distance and instantaneous communication. So there's lots of parallels to longitudinal interferometry. Good point.
So what I hope from this conversation is that we, coming from the different levels of medicine, normally people get into fights about who's wrong, who's right, who is curing better or less good, that we can just accomplish the different perspectives and maybe get a little bit more holistic picture on what is happening with the disease complex, and what the best solutions can be, and what might be good combinations of different approaches from different fields.
Some of our viewers might remember Harald Kautz Vella from his rather famous viral videos, including on the subject area of Morgellons and black goo, which does relate to this area of, energy fields at a distance and their health issues and astral hygiene and all kinds of very deep and esoteric subjects. But that's great. So, Joachim, maybe it would be good if you gave just a little background, if you want, like Vedicinals and how that led you to advance research on long COVID and these issues like that. Perhaps is that appropriate here? Or
yeah, let me first maybe start by trying to take along listeners and viewers that are, like myself, also not so familiar with what you guys are usually doing. And I just found some pretty good facts that maybe might humble us all in our sometimes arrogance that we think we understand everything. We understand actually very little. And if you look at our organism, we are made out of 35 trillion cells, which by itself is already quite a staggering number, because each cell you can compare in its complexity to a nuclear power station. So 35 trillion of those, to keep them functioning well and to have the information between the cells, the genetic building plan, building organs out of that, and having the whole organism function as we are used to, is already by itself quite a complex and interesting, how can you say in English, like a complex biosphere, or so to speak. But if you add then the same number of bacteria that live underneath our skin and on our skin, or are part of our organism, that's also 35 trillion. And then the staggering number of 350 trillion viruses that are living on and in us. So that might give you an idea how complex each human being is, from its structure, from its organization, and how is it possible that this all functions from the biggest level organs and blood and heart and brain to the microscopic level of each cell, and how is that organized and how is that kept function in its functionality. So that is how we started long before COVID to look at things, and I was so amazed. I said, there is so little that we know, and it was curiosity and meeting people like you and other scientists that look into all these fields from different angles, from quantum physics, like you, from fractality, from a wave perspective, normal biologists, people that know about minerals, people that know about normal biology and translate that, quantum physics, light, biophotons, water structures. So that was actually a fascinating voyage that all you guys helped our teams in to get a deeper understanding. And so COVID is for us actually a distraction from the real nice topics that we would like to get back to once this is over. So,
and I'd like to just tie one more little thread together too, since Harald mentioned the global scaling, and by implication Hartmut-Müller and the global instantaneous communication, various inventions that really never came together. But there's a connection between Harald's fame, as it were, regarding Morgellons and black goo, in that those materials we strongly suspect are what are called super dielectrics or phase conjugate dielectrics, which mean they're antenna for this radio of what I call longitudinal interferometry, which on the good side, if your DNA is imploding with bliss, you become radio for this longitudinal grid, the collective unconscious, getting a soul and action at a distance in DNA. The physics of almost all spiritual stories is the physics of that longitudinal interferometry, action at a distance. On the other hand, it's also, on the downside, a media for every kind of interstellar parasite and bad guy there is as well. So understanding the physics behind this and the radio that's happening between all genetic material, this then speaks to what Joachim is leading to right now. So anyway.
Yeah, maybe to bring that back into a normal, I'm a little bit, I'm German, so I like very nice structure. So if you look at the normal pharmaceuticals and chemical synthetic chemicals being used to stop certain conditions or to alleviate certain symptoms, that is one level. If you go with natural compounds, you will be on a already upstream level of that, because these molecules have been around us for billions of years. They belong to nature, they belong to our organism. Our organisms are used to that. It's not something foreign. Our organism has understood what it can use curcumin for, or quercetin, or any of these flavonoids and vitamins and minerals. The body knows how to use that. It's nothing strange to him. And so we were looking at these molecules when this whole problem started. We did it before, but now especially for COVID. And we thought, like, this complicated organism that I was describing is so in disarray, and so many hundreds of different mechanisms and pathways are disrupted. And the whole information between the cells and the organs and the reaction of the body, the overreaction, the cytokines, the organ damage, the cellular damage, what this virus or this spike protein can do in our body is immense. So we, from the beginning on, we said, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to address such a multitude of symptoms or conditions in such a multisystemic disease with targeted chemicals. You need kind of all-rounders. You need molecules that can do multitasking, many things at the same time, and actually work on demand. And the really interesting part is if you use natural molecules, they have two very specific properties. One is when you ingest them, the organism decides in which region he needs a higher concentration of these molecules, in the so-called assimilation process in affected organ systems. And then on the cellular level, you can see that these molecules, once inside the cell, the same molecule in the same cell type, be for example, a brain cell or in a kidney cell, can do two opposite things depending on the yes, that's it. depending on the status of the cell. If the cell is very strongly damaged and actually is beyond repair, then the same molecule can trigger like an apoptosis or like a suicidal process or flag it for replacement or senescence. And if the cell can be repaired, then the molecules will go about to do that. So there is also a signaling happening on a level that is not well understood between natural molecules and the cell itself. So that makes them good candidates for such a severe disorder in such a multitude of systems. And that's what we did when we saw this coming already very early on January 26, 2020. We started working immediately and analyze the virus, have a look at the genome and see where is the weak point, what, for example, has not mutated since SARS-1 and MERS, which is like a common denominator between these viruses, because you don't want to have a moving target with your intervention. You want to have something that has not changed, and that is, for example, the 3CL main protease. And as there is a long history of dangerous coronaviruses like SARS-1 and MERS, there was already a lot of research ongoing on these unmutated parts of the virus. So we could rely on older work that would target the unchanged part of the virus. So we started with that for good measures. And in the meantime, in the months that followed, we would get more and more and more reports out of the hospitals and from the medical community, what else is happening in the infected people, what kind of damages would now occur. And then we could further adapt. Sometimes we had to kick out some molecules and include others, because our knowledge of the pathways that needed to be covered was growing by the day. So it was a very complicated process to start from the beginning, to take out of 8,000 molecules the right candidates that go well with each other, that are synergistic, that don't do any harm, that are not anyhow toxic to the body in any concentration, and that will address the highest number of pathways that we find in this disease. So it was a 24/7, I don't know how many working groups with my partner Prakash. We at the moment in more than 450 different working groups parallel. They're not all active, but
this is the miracle of Joachim. Joachim assembled a team in India using major of his own personal resource, and they basically have a list of all these profound, many of them Vedic, quercetin, curcumin, many, and the synergy of the way these molecules fit together and address the issues. It's very complex. And actually, if I may say, Joachim has become something of the world expert on the synergy of what molecules in holistic synergy can naturally address. And the other thing that's very cool about this is you drink a small bottle about once a day, and we have friends, believe me, I say it's wonderful. But anywho, the other thing that's cool is you actually hit the bottle, you're homeopathically potentizing, and we understand you're charging those molecules for bioavailability. I think it's cool, Joachim. Anywho.
That's why we leave up to you guys to explain, because I mean, I do have my theories about quantum information in water, especially in water molecule storage. So by shocking it and like initiating a shock through the molecules, you will not bring in more active substances, but you will transfer the information from the molecules in the suspension into the water molecules. And when they reach your own water molecules, then you will be getting them the information of the molecules, not the substance. Yeah?
Adding spin, it could be piezoelectric in some cases, but you're adding charge, very much like biodynamic dynamization, et cetera. And it makes sense. So this bioavailability is spin, obviously, and you can feel it when you use it. It's quite amazing. Anyway.
But there's two things more to that. First of all, we to avoid placebo effect, we tested that on animals. So when we didn't even tell the animal, so it was a truly blind study. So we had normal material in water, and then we had our suspension, and then it was knocked like a tequila slammer, shocked on the table, and the animal lab didn't know about it. Nobody knew about it, and we told them, "Can you see any difference in the potency of these two different bottles?" And so.
And it was orders of magnitude. It was like much.
Yeah, the funny part that we had so the animal trial was a artificially induced myocardial infarction. That means we gave these rats a heart attack, and one group of rats got Vedicinals, and one group of rats didn't get any, and then a third arm they got the Vedicinals that was knocked. And there you could see that only on the biomarkers that were far elevated, like for troponin, or let's say the ones that really show ongoing damage that you can measure in the serum. The higher they were elevated in the untreated group, the better they were controlled by the natural molecules. So again,
charge it, and it worked.
Yeah,
that's the other miracle here is Joachim's group had the resources. They got actual clinical trials and the Indian equivalent of FDA approval, serious high-level clinical documentation. This is Vedicinals.com, and it's thanks to Joachim. It's a real achievement, a natural, beautiful, and it's generally anti-inflammatory in my personal experience as well. So anyway, I will. That's my opinion.
I mean, we had of course a lot of requirements we wanted to fulfill with this kind of formulation. And the first of all is that was in the beginning of the pandemic. We wanted it to be very, very potent as an antiviral, especially against this virus and its variants. So the first thing everybody now notices it now down the line. The first thing we saw is the very quickly evolving new variants and the pressure on mutations that was given on that virus. And so it is a very difficult to contain virus because it mutates faster than you can even measure it. And so if you want to stop that virus, then you have to not just have one target on that virus because it might move out of your sites and then you're not working anymore. So we are around 30 different mechanisms that the virus is using to get into the cells, to replicate, to fuse, and these are all well covered. So at the moment we see, for example, the new variants, we can even control them better. For some reason, we cannot always measure exactly because it's so many different pathways, but at the moment the viral clearance time is actually only half of what it used to be. So the virus has actually moved more into our, let's say, sites. So it's at the moment having a problem.
And Joachim is working with other very high global holistic medical groups. And Joachim has personally pioneered what I consider to be the high-level research on the way in which the virus can hide inside other bacteria, and also the way in which this group of viruses, for example, triggered major outbreaks of additional cancers, for example. So Joachim is, and there are other materials out there you'll see with Joachim explaining these things.
Yeah, like many, there are many viruses, even an Epstein-Barr virus or other retroviruses that can, in mid to long term, can be cancer causing. Yeah, so it's always like in our body, there's always a balance between our immune cells, our immune system, and maybe the epigenetic settings that will get cells to grow uncontrolled, like that's what cancer is in a way. And then you have all the metabolisms, the sugar, the Warburg effects, and all these kind of things. So it's actually a multitude of factors that come together. And SARS-CoV-2 or the spike protein looks like it is one of the candidates that can, in midterm and long-term, cause cancer, yes.
Many cancers. And Joachim just made a documentary film with that group about that. What's the name of that group, Joachim? That
that was our, we have a little group that we have formed, like a coalition. It's called the Long COVID Coalition. And what we do conferences and we do educational videos and tell people what we find in the literature and what we think is going on. So it's not always our opinion. We are more like the messengers. And because of there's an immense flow of information, tens of thousands of publications on COVID. So in that large noise, it is very easy to oversee things that are important. So our task also is to filter out of that noise, to filter out the really relevant things that are important for the patients and the therapists to understand what should be done, not only in acute symptom management or treatment, but also in prevention. Because now comes the next question: how can we stop things that we can measure are already underway, like severe neuronal damage, like cancer, like myocardial, also heart damages, like thrombosis that are ongoing over 6 months, 1 year and longer, microclotting, they call this in usual terms. So there's many things that are actually, you wouldn't even see any symptoms and you would still fall severely ill. And so what can be done to prevent that? First, you have to have the markers that you measure it in the patients, and you look under the microscope and you see what's happening. Then you see that there are viral pockets still in the intestines and that the virus is infecting bacteria, that our own bacteria is getting infected directly by the virus. That was not our finding. That was Carlo Brogna from Italy, who really deserves the Nobel Prize for that. Because how can you overlook something that important? As we have as many bacteria as we do have host cells. So if they get infected by the virus, that is, of course, a major factor.
Yes,
so to make it simple, we need to cover as much as possible. We can do a lot with our 9 molecules, with our product, but there are limitations because you need other raw materials, you need minerals, you need certain amino acids, you need other nicotinamides and NAD+ and mitochondrial kind of molecules. So there is a long list of other nutraceuticals or dietary supplements that do make a lot of sense, and also other interventions. We have good experience now with apheresis, which is like a blood cleansing machine similar to a kidney dialysis machine that cleans the blood out of the body and brings it back and filters out a lot of clots and antibodies and detrimental molecules that are in our blood. So that's a mechanical intervention. And there's a lot of other things that have shown already some relief for the millions of sufferers. There is any number between 20 to 100 million long COVID patients out there. And nobody knows exactly, but it's a huge number of people that suffer a lot, whose life has changed. They cannot go to work anymore. They are absolutely unable to do any physical exercise. And so they have a lot of neurological problems and most likely ongoing neurological damage, myocardial and heart damages. So the list is very long. So it's a large number of patients out there. And so our efforts are there to provide natural dietary supplement protocols for them, not only our own product. And so that we have some groups of integrative medics and nutritionists that are working in the field, and we help to put together these protocols, get feedback, and also now initiating more clinical trials on each of these segments. Like also you have viral persistence. So you want to really get rid and clear the body of all viruses that are still able to replicate within the system, because they will always send new waves of symptoms and condition to the body. Plus, if you are already suffering from long COVID conditions, you don't want to become reinfected because your body is already weakened. And another thing that happens, and maybe that is a good warning to everybody listening, the official narrative as well as alternative medics are saying, Omicron is mild, it's not a big problem. In our findings, what we see in laboratory results, in patient results, in biomarkers, is that any infection with any of these variants can result in the direct infection of your immune cells. So we have immune cells like T lymphocytes, natural killer cells, monocytes, macrophages. So this is our adaptive, and let's say these are not antibodies. These are our own immune cells, so to speak, our police. in the body. And they are getting directly infected by the virus, invaded by the virus, and the virus replicates in our own immune cells. So that is very similar to HIV. So it is going to be very difficult to sell the idea that we can obtain some sort of herd immunity with a virus that is actually infecting our own immune system and is highly evasive against any antibodies we have built from previous infection. So I can only caution everybody to be really careful and not get infected. And if getting infected, to take a strong antiviral. And the worst of your immune system is after constant exposure to Omicron and other variants and other coronaviruses, or spike protein does the same. The more you need an antiviral that really functions and works and kills the virus and helps your body to kick out the virus as soon as possible before it does more damage.
Yes.
Our populations are immunocompromised at the moment. You can see that on the hospital admissions for respiratory diseases that are not related to COVID. And these are sky high in the summer, very unlikely. Normally that is not happening. In the last years, we didn't have that. So that is one of the problems, yes.
So long-term immunocompromised related to many forms of this same infection. And by the way, many of these issues are related to the concept of inflammation in general. And it is my thought that probably this Vedicinals is useful in general about many kinds of inflammation, including spike protein side effects and blank side effects, which are all related to what Joachim is speaking about here. And we've seen personally in some experiences here, this has been incredibly helpful to those side effects. A very simple, natural Vedic liquid, and Joachim has done the homework. Should we invite Harald to
Yes.
comment a little bit as well? Also, in terms of Harald is an amazing, if I may say, potent shamanic or energy healer himself with a lifetime of experience, and he has a lot of experience about these issues. Perhaps this is a good time if that's appropriate.
Maybe it's good to mention it because some of the findings we utilized when we started working on the topic of COVID was self-perception on the bioenergetic level. So some of the things we rely on as known within our team of developers, they're not based on scientific acknowledged books, but it is what we basically could find as intersubjective perception of bioenergetic processes. All of us developing have been through the disease and we had our own perception. And what I would like to do first is basically take exactly Joachim's story and retell it against the background of the biophysics of it. Then we add another level to things. And first, normally COVID is known as the common cold. And when I look at normal disease happening since thousands of years, for me, the common cold is more like an exceptional biological program to cleanse the body. It's our friend, it's not an enemy. Obviously, COVID is not a friend. So something is different. And now I would like to share how we see that difference. When I look at the overall process of infection, what's happening is I'm in a room with somebody who is sick. He is emitting spike proteins from his infection. I breathe them in. My pheromone receptors collect the spike protein, signaling my system what disease is available. Normally what would happen at that point is that I have a checkup of how cleansed my system is. And if I was angry about my wife or fed up with my boss or have been doing things I didn't like to do for ages, I might need a break. And then the body says, okay, so many unexpressed emotion hormones in the system needs to be cleansed out. So I need that infection to clear my system. What happens next is that the decision to basically acquire the disease is sent as a package to the thyroid. The thyroid is actually a biophoton organ. It's full with jellies and glowing crystals or piezoelectric stuff. So the thyroid is forming like a socket, a certain pattern, light pattern, that expresses to the outside that this is a disease that is needed by this body. And then there is a biophotonic exchange from the one infected to the thyroid of the one who wants to get infected. Basically gathering all the updated data of that disease. And then the thyroid starts to control the voice of the human body in a way that the frequency patterns of the voice rule the immune system to allow virus replication and to stop virus destruction. This is coming through the voice part of it.
I just, not to interrupt, I just saw today a major news article about voice analysis reveals whether you're infected or not.
Yes.
Major news article today.
Yes. It's arriving in mainstream. And then the next step is actually also the basically the decision to get the disease is done by switching an epigenetic switch between BRCA1 and 5,3-BP1. BRCA1 is methylated, 5,3-BP1 is demethylated, which means the thyroid is opened to collect. And the BRCA1 is actually the gene hosting the incarnating spirit, the day consciousness, the point of perspective through which we look into our reality, into our incarnation. So the soul is kind of disconnected from the body, and the thyroid is opened to invite an exceptional program to take over the control of the body for a while until everything is cleansed by the virus, things are extracted biochemically, and then the epigenetic switch is switching back. This needs a certain key where the body says, job is done. All the biomarker levels are back to normal. There's nothing to cleanse out anymore. And then the epigenetics switch back. And then the immune system is getting from the voice the order to shut down all the viruses and stop the disease and get back to normal, to recollect the spirit into the body and chase out the bioenergetic form that came in from the infected. On the biophoton level. And now this is a healthy disease, kind of a natural disease. This is what helps us to maintain our body in a functional and clean form. With COVID, we see completely different things happen. With COVID, the presence of the spike protein itself is shown to basically apply that switch and break it at the same time. Like the spike protein itself is causing a methylation of BRCA1, which means we do not have the choice, do I need the infection or don't I need it? Just having the spike protein in our body is enough to make the decision for us that we need to get sick. This is a complete violation of the natural order of disease and health. So this doesn't look like normal disease. The presence of 8 segments do not look like a normal disease. The presence of cone snail and snake venoms produced by this biology doesn't look like a normal disease. So normally, this is kind of an important point to make. Normally, if somebody's catching a cold, I would just say, God bless you, and wish him to get better as quick as possible and have fun with the time it takes out for healing. I would never advise on taking any medicine for any disease because all the disease have their function within biology and nature is perfect. With this one, I'm fully with Joachim saying, okay, this is something exceptional. and it's not supportive to the body. It's destructive on so many levels, and we don't have the choice to get it or not to get it. So we need to intervene medically to get rid of the symptoms and to repair the damage done by it. And my guess, I'm not 100% sure with it, but I've got that gut feeling, and it tests positive if I do muscle testing on it, that actually the formulation he found with Vedicinals is like a key that, especially if you activate it with a hammering on the table, the key that is from day one signaling to the immune response actually that the job is done. Because normally this is kind of what I have the feeling, if there is damage in the body and during a phase of disease the damage is in the process of getting fixed, all those biochemical components are in a disbalance. Nutrients are needed for the process, so the level of that nutrient will go down as long as the body is processing it. And when the job is done, levels go up again. And then at a certain point, like a key has 5 different fingers or 5 different sizes to fit into the lock, when all the nutrients you need or that are present in a healthy system are back at normal levels, this is the key that tells the epigenetics to switch back to healthy, which means demethylate BRCA1 and methylate 5,3-BP1 to stop the exceptional program the disease is. And my feeling is that Vedicinals is turning that key from day one, which normally I would say is not a good idea because people need disease to cleanse themselves. But in the case of this disease, it's the only thing you can do to prevent the damage coming from all the not known natural aspects of the entire thing.
And it kind of fits that Vedicinals has been called nutraceutical in the sense that it's a kind of key nutrients as well as not just medicine, key nutrients.
Yeah.
Oops, I think your mic is off, Joachim. You're muted.
Yeah, maybe, hello. Yeah, maybe Harald can describe. I mean, you went through the ordeal of a severe COVID infection. Maybe you want to speak a little bit about what you felt there.
Yeah, that was kind of a funny thing because I just had decided to jump into research, and the first meeting we had with my radionics team in Radolfzell, I caught the infection. And it hit me quite heavy, which means that I had to stay the days in bed. I could not imagine to ever again want something. It was a state of complete lethargy, like lying in bed. Even if somebody brought me food, I didn't bother to touch it. And it went like that for about 3-4 days with complete agony. And I really was trying to find will in me, and I couldn't. Something that was normally in me, living in me, was completely out of my system, and whatever was left over in my body was not vital at all. And then, of course, cognitive things still worked. And then I decided to test on myself all the medications that were explicitly designed for COVID. Starting with protocols involving nicotinic acid and vitamins and things, didn't help much. Artemic was the second one I tested. It tasted like I need more of this, but I wouldn't have been able to pay the amount drinking a couple of those bottles for 100 euro per day. So I emptied those and didn't have any improvement with the recommended dose. And then the third one I tried was Vedicinals. And it took 2.5-3 days, and I was energy-wise back to normal. And then after like 1.5-2 weeks, the relapse kicked in, which, as far as I understand it, is the spike protein allergy hitting the lung from the leftovers in the body. And that again almost killed me, losing lung volume, being down to 3/4 of a liter lung volume, having cold sweat every night, drowning in an ocean in bed. And so I took a second round of Vedicinals and got out in one piece from the relapse phase. So I would say, basically extrapolating what I went through, I would say Vedicinals saved my life twice at that point. This is my personal experience, an interesting thing, because this is why I say that this is not a normal disease. This is why I say that it is not applying the switch from healthy to sick. It's destroying the switch. Even after curing the biochemical part, I had to realize that my spirit was not back in. I had a number of really, really weird experiences, like lying there every night, watching my body sleep. Personally having the impression I'm awake all night, but then I catch myself snoring. So I had to realize, wow, my body is sleeping, but my consciousness is outside of it, capable of watching my body. I had several outer body experiences during those nights. And that was kind of a funny thing. On the day I visited Joachim in those days, I went like, I wish I would know the gene responsible for losing your soul. And Joachim said, actually, I can tell you which one it is, because I was not aware of the then new research on the BRCA1, 5-BP1 connection. And he told me, actually, it's the BRCA1 that is switched by the spike protein. And I knew epigenetics are actually reacting on speech. So you can affirm, basically, reprogram your genetics just by making decisions that you speak out loudly in your heart chakra. So I said, I demethylate my gene BRCA1, buff! And my spirit bumped in like a comet into the moon. And I was back to normal and myself. So this is what I say, that, I mean, I am highly trained in self-perception due to the spiritual work I do. Not everyone is feeling the return of his spirit in such a dramatic way if he never even bothered to feel things inside of himself. Most of the people are just using their normal senses and are completely identified with the world around them, and don't have the internal perception. This is kind of my profession, to feel myself and others in compassion. So things are clearer to me, or might be clearer to me than to others.
This fits very nicely. The advanced geobiology school, Stefan Cardino, Lausanne, for example, they have this concept of, are you beside yourself today? And the way they measure that is if the center of gravity of your aura has decoupled from the center of gravity of your body physically. And they actually measure the gap of how far you have decoupled from the center of your plasma body, your soul, sort of. And they measure that difference. And the thing is, obviously implosion in the blood and bliss allow that implosive centripetal presence of the aura to be centered in your body, for example, around your heart. And interestingly, we find our plasmatech, Therify.net, also many, not all, many of our centers report anecdotally being able to help people with blank or spike protein side effects. And indeed, plasma, which is massively centripetal, would very logically help restore the centripetal force that would bring your aura back into your body. So I find it rather fascinating. You said, well, I was outside my body, watching my body. And there's even stories Valerie was telling about, the pets didn't recognize their owner after the side effects because the soul didn't seem to be, decoupled. So this center of the plasma, and we've spent many months trying to teach the physics of what is the soul, the centripetal force of this longitudinal coherence. For example, ability to radiate a lucid dream indicates you can take memory through death. And if that's not soul, what is? So the coherence of this aura obviously is related to the issues of this disease. Anyway, but so Joachim, please, or Harald, go ahead.
I've got one more just to close that a little bit. That was a lot of theory now, just to basically hint to how practical applications can look like. If you have that more holistic understand of infection and disease, for example, you can name a number of etheric fragrances, oils, that occupy exactly the same pheromone receptors like the spike protein does, and then you disrupt the process of infection at that point. So we created, for example, Cosmic Balance is a fragrance that can be used for exactly that purpose. You can apply it for 3 hours. You are safe to move around with infected people and or people with vaccinations that shed spike proteins, and there is no impact to your system from that because the pheromone receptors are blocked and they can't give that command to the thyroid to open up to receive the programming for symptoms.
Is that like an essential oil or?
Yeah, it's like perfume, an essential oil you apply somewhere near your nose so that you breathe it in 24/7 or as long as it lasts. It's traded by Zirisana.com. This is kind of one of the things becoming possible when you apply the wider understanding of what disease is and how it functions.
But do you want to say the name of that and the website again?
Cosmic Balance, red for women, blue for men, like kind of adding on different oils to make it woman-like, man-like.
And the website?
Zirisana.com.
Could you spell that maybe even?
Sirisana.
Zirisana.com. Interesting. Very interesting. So yes, the pheromones is more than a fear that roams.
and especially things like applying affirmations is something you can nicely do with radionics. This is why I named kind of that level of possibilities within medicine, applying your information realm with radionics. It's one way, and things like the affirmation demethylate my gene BRCA1 can be put in words from there, in numbers from there, in vibrations, be imprinted on globulins and ingested. This is kind of one of the many switches we found and applied with the balance series in radionics.
And if people wanted to learn more about your research in that regard, is there a way they could do that?
Timeloopsolution.com more for the theory, and Zirisana.com for the trade.
We said Zirisana already. Time Loop Solution.
Timeloopsolution.com or Aquarius-technologies.de is my personal website. All the scientific publications are on my personal website.
Great. Thank you. Yes. So, Joachim, does this fit the metaphor? What you were saying was the other energy levels of this disease, as it were.
Yeah, that is for sure one level. And I mean, where we meet is on the epigenetics level. Let me say a few words to that. Okay, most of the normal mainstream medical communities insist on placebo trials. No? So just to make sure that you have counted out the placebo effect, and they kind of look at the placebo effect as something that's a hindering factor. It's like a menace for them. And since years I go like, okay, as how high is the placebo effect? Can be up to more than 30% of effectiveness just with placebo alone. And then you have nocebo, which is like the other way around, that you are kind of getting psychosomatically ill because you are, let's say, depressed or whatever, and that has an influence on your epigenetic settings, on your methylation patterns, and will make you sick. So 30% to heal and 30% to make you sick is quite a factor. And I went like some years ago, I went like, why is nobody using that? You know, I mean, it comes for free, and it's just like my subconscious setting can make such a huge scientifically measurable difference in my health. So why not use that? And then if you look at the molecules, the natural molecules, there is, I don't know how many papers, but a really large volume of papers showing, measuring exactly ubiquination and epigenetic resettings being done by natural molecules and flavonoids, like, for example, what we have in Vedicinals. So what Harald was describing, BRCA1, P53, Vedicinals alone will not do all of it, but you add some other molecules to it, like vitamin D3, calcium, and others. There were studies going on for, I don't know, even a decade with women that, for example, have developed breast cancer, and with the BRCA1 gene and P53, like these are tumor suppressor genes. And if they took these supplements, it was measurable that in the outcome, they had a lot less cancer cases than the groups that got nothing or placebo. And so now if you even take, now if you would have both combined, that you believe in something and you get the right molecules, wow, that would already be quite a big gain, isn't it? So why not go for that? It is actually not very expensive. And so we have to always remind ourselves to be grateful to what you always teach, get into bliss, have a positive and constructive way of thinking, and not get scared and not have too much fear. You know, so if an average Joe like us, like our group, can come in and bring out such a product, such a bombshell of a product, that shows that anything is possible. And we should just believe in ourselves as humans that we can achieve these things on all these levels. And I think that must be understood. Don't sit in your corner and be scared and let everything bring you further down, because then you will get sick on top of it just because of your subconscious settings. So the placebo effect for me is something we should use actively and build on that. It has been proven by normal science now, let's say science that has been accredited with peer-reviewed studies and everything. There's no doubt that this is working.
A beautiful concept. So we combine the faith and the bliss with good natural biochemistry, and this is where indeed Joachim's work has shined. That he, of all the natural remedies in Vedic as well, the synergy of the right core group of them, in this case 9 Vedicinals, Joachim has stacks, hundreds of pages of research on how they interact synergetically. It's just amazing. And so Joachim, the more detailed information on the research, etc., I assume it's all at vedicinals.com, including your other videos, etc., or is all the research there?
On our YouTube channel, you find, what we did, we have on our YouTube channel, we do have a selection of some videos that are directly related to Vedicinals, but I'm also co-founder and member of the Long COVID Coalition, which is now a platform for, we did already 4 big conferences, international conferences with experts from various fields, thrombosis, neurosciences, just name it, cancer, inflammation, and so on. So all different experts on long COVID treatment in their fields came together in certain conferences that we held and spoke about and presented what they could find, what kind of interventions they are suggesting, and give you a very clear understanding where science is at. And I think that our group, the Long COVID Coalition, has done a great job of shining the light on many, many pathways and conditions that were not previously known, or invite these experts to show us. And our role is more to get these experts interconnected, work with each other. So we have several working groups with integrative medics and nutritionists and other experts, and bring them together and now see that we find a common denominator, because there's so many patients out there that are damaged by the spike protein or the virus, and it goes into the tens of millions, maybe much, much more. So individualized medicine and individualized treatment will be very hard, because you don't have enough therapists and knowledgeable doctors now to treat all these patients. So my idea was now to go and find a common denominator, because in most of the people, there will be very likely conditions occurring, and likely the very similar mechanisms being dysregulated. not in all, but in a majority. And to find that common denominator would make that scalable. Because how the hell are you going to help tens of millions of people? Our health system is anyhow under strong strain. And I don't know how next winter will be. It doesn't look too nice. We have already now many hospitals in UK and Spain being completely flooded with patients. The wards are full. And so and there's not really much COVID around in the hospital. So what will happen in the winter when there's another wave of maybe a more severe strain with the same infectiousness as Omicron, then we have to be able to help ourselves or have a scalable program so that many patients can be prevented from severe damage and that they can get some help here. So that is what we are working on at the current moment, to find the common denominator and build a protocol from our side with nutraceuticals. Of course, there's also some very useful pharmaceuticals. And the combination of those alternating and other interventions, like, for example, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Serify patients or clients that have gone through Serify treatment and used Vedicinals or other interventions and got a big improvement in their conditions?
Well, we started with our biggest centers, anecdotally reported helping a large number, replicably, repeatedly helping people with side effects of blank, side effects of spike protein. And having looked at that, and that was before we actually started using Vedicinals. But when we started using Vedicinals with the plasma, the effects, I must say, we have done a small number here, but the effects were outstanding, I must say. And we think it makes some sense. You add centripetal force, neg entropy, to the aura as a whole, and then you add the best synergy, a recipe of the natural, Vedic natural nutraceuticals, and you put that together. We had our friend here, her jaw was stuck. She had these side effects, and she was really in bad. She was a nurse, ran the local healing center, and it was down because their best nurse was out from the side effects. And a couple of days later, after the combination of the Vedicinals and the Serify, anecdotally, her husband literally practically didn't recognize her. She was bubbling again. And this elderly guy lives near here, Dominic, incredible. He was like, frankly, almost suicidal from side effects. After a few days, combined the Serify with the Vedicinals, again, it was outstanding. Clearly, this is anecdotal, and we haven't had the funding to do the kind of clinical trials that Joachim has indeed done. But anecdotally, I can tell you for sure, combining centripetal negentropic plasma, Serify.net, with Vedicinals has been outstanding, really. And again, that's subjective from my case, and the physics sort of makes sense. If you become more massively centripetal, your whole aura, plus at the molecular level, obviously that synergy is, anyway, so it's been good news.
All good scientific developments start with an observation of something, yeah, and then it can be scaled up later into trials and whatever. So if you can already observe some things like that, it might be worth to try both again. I mean, your systems are out there. Where do you have Serify? You have all over Europe, and
we're Serify.net. If you click on the centers, we're in about 25 countries, and those are just the public centers. And there's other related devices, plasmafire.com and Quantify, and now we have a new piezo device, and all of them do the same thing. They make this centripetal implosive field. And even the Bliss binaural, they all have the same principle. Depending on the bandwidth of the phase conjugation, how big is the pine cone kissing noses, how much neg entropy do you get? And so we're actually, we're moving McDonald's right next to Burger King, and we're going to have all these synergetic products all doing the same thing. And, the interest has been incredible. And the anecdotal stories, as you can read about in our blog, are amazing. And we're delighted to be in synergy with Joachim and his brave new product, Vedicinals.com. Joachim risked practically his whole career to launch this. It's amazing. And I think we need to respect that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, but now we come back to the intro when I was talking about this incredible amount of trillions of cells and bacteria, and like we're a huge biosphere that needs some coherence and some order in order to work. So it's like a big country. You have if you compare Switzerland to maybe some failed state where it's civil war, that is maybe comparable to a healthy organism to a unhealthy organism where things really get out of hand. And so now to make the listeners understand better, so you are actually above what we are doing, way above upstream, in trying to restore negentropy and order on an energetic and frequency level for the whole organism, so that this goes back into some sort of orderly fashion. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. We call it negentropy. And it has been verified multiple times now over several years in GDV and live blood cell trials. So we're pretty confident that we are doing that. We're charging the aura. We can prove that. and it fits that it would be synergy with yours.
And how does Harald's radionic and biophoton work come in with that to bridge between these two things? Or Harald, could you explain where your work comes in this context?
Maybe illustrated, because there's additional to the entire picture of what an infection is. There's another mechanism we discovered with long COVID patients that is very, very, very interesting to understand. It's exactly displaying the connection between biochemistry and biophysics. What we observed with the long COVID patients, that quite a few of them developed narcissistic traits. And this is basically losing their emotionality at first place. So we started to look into how that functions. The same patients, or some of them, they had extreme densities of ferritin in their body. They were bleeding, not bleeding, sweating black pearls from their skin to that degree. And at the same time, the potassium values, by affecting the thyroid that is controlling the supply with potassium in the body, were extremely low. And just on the biochemical plane, what you would expect to happen if you have excess ferritin and too little potassium is that the piezo crystals in the lower part of the body that actually are the interface between the emotional body and the nervous system, they would recrystallize from potassium-based hexagonal crystal structure to iron-based orthorhombic crystal structure. And when you have orthorhombic piezos, they will never ever function as an interface to the emotional body, because the emotional body is hexagonal or trigonal in structure. This is kind of when I talk about implosive field structures, there are rotational symmetries to those fields that can be basically read by looking at the symbols for chakras in the Vedic tradition. There you can see the symmetries of different aspects of consciousness. So what apparently happens is that those piezo crystals recrystallize, turn iron-based, reject the emotional body. And if you follow basically the only medical tradition that is talking about those things, which is the original TCM, there it's called GU syndrome. The orthorhombic ones, they attract basically mental parasites, like entities that are not belonging to the human consciousness. This is what is described in the original pre-cultural revolution TCM as GU syndrome. And this is where you can nicely see how the spiritual aspect or the bioenergetic aspect sits on biochemical disbalancing of the body. Mm-hmm. And this is a point where we tried basically to get to the switches of it with the possibilities we have in informational medicine. We created something called Sol Unit, also traded by Sirisana. And it's meant to rebalance potassium and iron and reattract the emotional body back into the center. Mm-hmm. As the force it is. So there are two aspects to it, basically splitting off the spirit and splitting off the emotional body. Two distinct processes in the body. And I'm really curious because I haven't looked into Vedicinals that deep, how and where possibly this potassium ion balance in the body is rebalanced by Vedicinals.
You know, just to say briefly that our theory of implosion phase conjugation, the link point where the longitudinal coherence then enables communication with DNA radio and the soul, clearly DNA pent piezo, absolutely beautiful for phase conjugate implosion. And then we have the pump wave, the low frequencies of human bliss in the heart and the brain. It's a beautiful imploder, and you can see why you get soul from that. Whereas a hex crystal like piezo quartz would be relatively soulless unless it was pumped by the infrasound of human bliss, which is a phase conjugate pump wave. Otherwise, no. So in general, tetracubic or would not, whereas pent surely would. So that's an introduction to a language to think about, you know, when is DNA radio engaged, an implosion possible. But you were giving a question for Joachim, I think there, weren't you, about the phosphorus, was it? No.
Question was how the iron potassium balance.
Potassium.
So what we don't know about the potassium, but we do know about ferritin and the iron homeostasis that has been shown in our clinical trials to be well balanced back. So there was no disbalance after 2 weeks of treatment with the patients.
Right.
So we seem to really go well into this. It's pretty much everything that you see disbalance out of with biomarkers measurable in the serum gets pretty much addressed by Vedicinals. Not everything. I mean, it's not possible. You cannot have that in one product. But the majority of things that you look at in COVID are balanced very well in any way you want to look at it. And we didn't even have money and the possibility to look at all the. We have 250 now pathways that are dysregulated. And I don't know if we would cover them all. Theoretically, we do more than 200. But
did you ever look at thyroid function? If the thyroid hormones are coming back to normal? Because this is kind of going hand in hand with potassium.
I know, yeah, but that is our problem, because I was asked many times now what kind of biomarkers and serum markers I would like to have in order, not only for our trials, but in general. And the problem is, that would be more than 200. So if you take 200 biomarkers from a patient, it will cost a fortune. And if you can't do that with one patient, you have to do that maybe with 200-300. So it's going to be tens of thousands of data points. In our clinical trial, we took already 20 biomarkers, which was a very big thing to do, because you have 124 patients. You take these biomarkers 3 to 4 times during the whole clinical trial. That costs a lot of money. You have to pay all the biomarker sets. They have to go to the laboratory. The blood has to be taken, they have to be analyzed. Everything has to be statistically well documented and so on. It's a huge effort, and we would need millions of dollars and large trials for Vedicinals alone, not even talking now about additional protocols which we want to combine. Now, so this is something a private initiative like ours cannot really provide anymore. We have gone way beyond what is possible for normal people to try as a private initiative. I mean,
but even as it is, you have such amazing clinical documentations, and the fact that you made the equivalent of the FDA in India, impressed. But I do think that Harald's comments about, you know, tuning the body crystals and whether the soul can work in the DNA radio and connecting that to the mineral imbalances is brilliant and interesting and a great path to pursue.
Let us see if we can in the future have more combined efforts and have clients and patients that want to combine it on their own decision and say, look, I would like to do Vedicinals with Therapy and get some from Sirisana and report back. There's many people that have a very good feeling for their own well-being, spiritual and physically, and that can report back. So maybe it's not a clinical trial, but it's also giving us some ideas. Sometimes we don't even have time to wait for all these other data, because the disease is in progress. And like I said, next winter might become a very, very grim winter. I hope not. We're praying every day that we are wrong.
Tens of millions of long COVID and all the side effect diseases, and the list, like, was it 500% more heart issues and cancers, and it's incredible, the numbers. Medically, it's pretty scary. So I think people like Joachim who are out there making preparations for natural self-empowering solutions are very valuable. Thank you, Joachim and Harald.
Thank you so much for this interview. Yes, thank you for your time and what you are doing as well, for great benefit of humanity, for sure.
We hope to be of service. So thank you. So again, you can be in communication with us through Vedicinals.com, Joachim, and through Therify.net with myself and with Harald. Several websites. Do you want to repeat your websites again, Harald?
Aquarius-technologies.de, timeloopsolution.com, and Sirisana.com.
Sirisana, Sirisana.com. Great. So we hope we've been of service. Please stay in touch. Give us your feedback. And as Joachim said, we'd be delighted to have your feedback as you try these things. And this hopefully will be an ongoing dialogue and we become a shareable wave. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Blessings.
Bless.
Thank you. Okay.